everybody. Our story today is The Case of the Fifth Word, an Encyclopedia Brown mystery by Donald J. Sobol. In Idaville, no one grown-up or child got away with breaking the law. Police officers across the nation wondered how Idaville did it. What was the secret? To passing motorists, Idaville looked like any other seaside town. It had playgrounds, banks, parking meters, and beautiful white beaches. It had churches, a synagogue, and 2 delicatessens. And it had a fine new police station. But the real headquarters for catching lawbreakers was a red brick house at 13 Rover Avenue. There lived 10-year-old Encyclopedia Brown, America's crime buster in sneakers. No one except his parents knew that he was the mastermind behind the town's spotless police record. Encyclopedia's father was chief of police. Everyone thought that he must be the smartest police chief in the country. Chief Brown was smart and quick. He didn't sit around and worry. When he came up against a case he could not solve, he acted at once. He cleared his desk, put on his hat, and went home to dinner. Encyclopedia solved the case for him before the meal was over. Chief Brown would have liked to tell everyone about his only child, but who would believe him? Who would believe the best detective alive was a 5th grader? So he said nothing. Encyclopedia never spoke of the help he gave his father. He didn't want to seem different from the other boys. But there was nothing he could do about his nickname. He was stuck with it. Only his parents and his teachers called him by his real name, Leroy. Everyone else called him Encyclopedia. An encyclopedia is a book or set of books filled with facts from A to Z. So was Encyclopedia's head. He read more books than anyone in Idaville, and he never forgot a fact. His pals said he was like a library and a computer rolled into one, and more user-friendly. At the dinner table Tuesday night, Chief Brown stared at his cream of mushroom soup. Encyclopedia and his mother knew what that meant. He had a mystery he could not solve. Tim Nolan died yesterday, he announced matter-of-factly. That name is familiar, Mrs. Brown said. Wasn't he mixed up in a jewelry robbery a few years ago? 5 years ago, Chief Brown replied. 2 masked men held up the Diamond Mart on 6th Avenue. They got away with $1 million worth of jewelry. I thought Tim Nolan was arrested, Mrs. Brown said. He was questioned, not arrested, Chief Brown corrected. I always believed that Nolan and a friend, a man named Daniel Davenport, pulled the holdup. There wasn't any proof, though. Encyclopedia sat quietly. He knew his mother and father were discussing the case for his benefit. His father filled in the facts. Nolan and Davenport had met, Chief Brown said, while both were in prison in South Carolina. They became friendly because of a shared interest in codes. Nolan was let out first. He settled in Idaville and started a small palm tree nursery. It barely yielded him a living. Davenport came to live with Nolan a week before the jewelry store holdup. During the holdup, one gunman's mask slipped. A clerk thought she recognized Nolan, but she wasn't absolutely sure. I remember now, Mrs. Brown said. The clerk refused to testify against him, and no trace of the stolen jewelry ever turned up. Davenport hasn't been seen since the holdup, Chief Brown said. My hunch is that he and Nolan decided to hide the loot until things cooled down. Didn't you search Nolan's house, dear? I got a court order this morning, Chief Brown said. Officers Lewis and Maloney just about took Nolan's place apart. They didn't find one piece of the stolen jewelry. Is there some mystery about Nolan's death yesterday? Mrs. Brown inquired. Yes and no, Chief Brown answered. Nolan suffered from a bad heart for many years. Yesterday morning, he had a stroke. He must have realized he was dying. With his last strength, he managed to put his will on the kitchen table. It leaves everything he owns, including his palm tree nursery, to Davenport. What's suspicious about that? Mrs. Brown asked. Nothing about the will itself, just about a sheet from his desk calendar. It was clipped to the will, said Chief Brown. He took out his pocket notebook and leafed through the pages. I copied what Nolan wrote on the sheet, he said. Here it is. He handed the notebook to Mrs. Brown. She read what he had copied. It has Davenport's name and address, she said. and 4 words I don't understand." She handed the notebook to Encyclopedia. "What do you make of the 4 words, Leroy?" Encyclopedia read the 4 words below Davenport's name and address. Nam Ute Sweden Hertz. Mrs. Brown looked at him hopefully. Usually, he needed to ask one question to solve a case before dessert. They were still in the soup. Encyclopedia leaned back and closed his eyes. He always closed his eyes when he did his hardest thinking. After several seconds, he opened his eyes and asked his question. "Is there a young fir tree in Mr. Nolan's palm tree nursery?" Chief Brown thought a moment. "Yes, there is. One. On the south side of the house. How did you know?" "The 4 words say so," Encyclopedia answered. "They do?" said Chief Brown. "See for yourself," Encyclopedia urged. Chief Brown studied the 4 words. Nam, Ute, Sweden, Hertz. He shook his head and passed the notebook to Mrs. Brown. "Can you figure it out?" "Nam is a shortening of nominative, a grammatical term," stated Mrs. Brown, who had taught English and other subjects in high school. "Utes are an American Indian tribe. Sweden is a country in Northern Europe, and Hertz is Hertz." She lifted her gaze to Encyclopedia and shook her head. "I can't figure it out," she confessed. "Davenport disappeared right after the holdup," Encyclopedia reminded her. "As Dad said, Davenport and Nolan must have hidden the stolen jewelry. Probably not more than a week or so ago, Nolan changed the hiding place." "You think that he tried to tell Davenport by phone and failed to reach him?" Mrs. Brown asked. "So he wrote the 4 words as he was dying?" Chief Brown nodded. "We'll find Davenport now that we know his address." "He'll learn he has been left the palm tree nursery," Mrs. Brown said, "and the 4 words will tell him where the jewelry is hidden." "Right," Encyclopedia said. "The code is simple, especially as it's written on a sheet from a calendar. Davenport will understand it easily. Still, it wouldn't make much sense to someone who isn't looking for a hiding place." "Leroy!" Mrs. Brown exclaimed. "What do the 4 words mean?" "You already guessed, Mom. They tell where the jewelry is hidden." Mrs. Brown looked ready to explode with impatience. "Where?" Encyclopedia smiled. "Why, under the 5th word," he said. What was the 5th word? Well, we're going to need to turn to page 73 to figure it out. Here we go. The solution to the case of the 5th word. To tell Davenport where he'd hidden the stolen jewelry, Nolan wrote a 4-word code. As the key to the code, he wrote the 4 words on a sheet from a desk calendar. The 4 words stood for days of the week. Nolan dropped the letters D-A-Y. Then he used the other letters to form words. So Nam was Monday, Utes Tuesday, Sweden Wednesday, and Hertz Thursday. The unwritten 5th word was fur, or Friday. The jewelry was found inside a 20-gallon jug of earth from which grew the young fir tree in Nolan's nursery, just as Encyclopedia had foreseen. Wow. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. Please subscribe and join us again next time. Bye.